The transport ship Meridian's Edge drifted through the void like a dying star, its hull scarred by energy burns and micrometeorite impacts that told a story of violence and survival. Commander Thaxel of the Galactic Council's Third Fleet watched through the observation deck's reinforced transparisteel as the battered vessel limped toward their flagship, the Sovereign Dawn. "Status report," Thaxel commanded, his four compound eyes tracking the ship's erratic approach through space debris that shouldn't exist in this empty sector. "Single life sign aboard," commanded Navigation Officer Vexara, her voice tight with confusion. "Human designation. The ship's automated systems are barely functional, running on backup power only. Hull breaches sealed from the inside, but the energy signatures—" She paused, checking her instruments again. "Sir, the readings don't match any known weapon systems." Thaxel's mandibles clicked in growing unease. The Meridian's Edge had departed 6 months ago, carrying a full battalion of human soldiers, 200 of Earth's finest warriors, on what should have been a routine patrol of the Outer Rim territories. The last transmission had been garbled, fragmented, something about unusual readings and contact established near the abandoned world of Kepler 442b. Then nothing but silence for half a standard cycle. The docking bay's atmospheric processors hummed to life as the transport ship settled onto the deck with a grinding screech of damaged metal. Emergency teams rushed forward, their equipment scanning for biological hazards, radiation, and structural damage. The readings were inconsistent, normal in some areas, completely off the charts in others. When the airlock finally cycled open with a mechanical wheeze, a figure emerged from the ship's darkened interior. Even by human standards, he was imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made seasoned warriors from a dozen different species instinctively step back. His combat armor was pristine, too pristine for someone who'd been missing for 6 months in a ship that looked like it had been through a war. Not a scratch, not a dent, not even a scuff mark. The polished surface reflected the docking bay's lights like a mirror. But it was his face that made Thaxel's chitinous exoskeleton shiver. Weathered, yes, but in a way that suggested not just time, but transformation. His eyes held something that definitely wasn't entirely human anymore. An intelligence that seemed to look through everything and everyone, seeing patterns and connections that others couldn't perceive. "Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, Human Defense Corps, serial number 774921, the man said, his voice flat and mechanical, as if he was reciting from a script written for someone else. "Reporting for debriefing." Thaxel approached cautiously, his security instincts screaming warnings he couldn't quite articulate. "Sergeant Rodriguez, where are your men? What happened to the Meridian's Edge? Our sensors show massive damage, but you appear unharmed." Rodriguez's gaze fixed on something beyond the commander's shoulder, or perhaps beyond the ship itself. "Request permission to report to Medical Bay for standard post-mission evaluation." "Sergeant, I need to know what happened out there. 200 soldiers don't just disappear. The energy signatures we're detecting—" "I said," Rodriguez interrupted, his voice carrying a weight that made the entire docking bay fall silent, made even the mechanical sounds of the ship seem to quiet in deference. "I request permission to report to Medical Bay." Something in that tone, something ancient and patient and utterly confident, made Thaxel nod without thinking. "Granted." As Rodriguez walked away, his boots echoing in the sudden quiet with a rhythm that seemed just slightly off, Thaxel noticed something that would haunt him for cycles to come. The human's shadow, cast by the docking bay's harsh lights, seemed wrong. Too long, too dark, too fluid. And for just a moment, just one terrifying moment, it appeared to have far too many arms, reaching in directions that defied the laws of physics. The emergency teams began their investigation of the Meridian's Edge, but Thaxel couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. Whatever had happened out there, whatever had taken 200 human soldiers and left only one behind, had just walked onto his ship, and it was smiling. Dr. Veltara had examined thousands of species across the galaxy during her 40-year career, but humans had always fascinated her more than most. Their biological resilience, their psychological adaptability, their seemingly limitless capacity for both creation and destruction, they were walking contradictions that defied most xenobiological theories. But the human sitting before her in Medical Base 7 was something entirely different. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she began, her 6 tentacles dancing over the medical scanner's controls with practiced precision, "your physical condition is remarkable. No signs of malnutrition despite 6 months in space, no injuries despite your ship's obvious damage, no indication of extended isolation stress. In fact, your cellular structure shows signs of significant enhancement." Rodriguez sat perfectly still on the examination table, his hands folded precisely in his lap, his breathing so regular it seemed mechanical. He stared at the wall behind her, not through it exactly, but as if he could see patterns in the metal that weren't visible to anyone else. "Standard human physiology, Doctor," he said, his voice carrying the same flat monotone he'd used with Commander Thaxel. "No abnormalities to report." "That's not what my scans are telling me." Veltara's voice carried a note of professional frustration that had developed over decades of dealing with uncooperative patients. "Your muscle density is 40% above human norm. Your bone structure has been somehow reinforced at the molecular level. Your cardiovascular system is operating at peak efficiency despite the theoretical stress of long-term space travel. And your neural activity." She paused, studying the readings that made no sense according to any known medical database. "Sergeant, I've never seen patterns like this. It's as if your brain is processing information at superhuman speeds while maintaining perfect emotional control." "I feel fine, Doctor." "Where have you been for the past 6 months?" "Completing my mission." "What mission?" "Our records show a routine patrol assignment." "Where are your fellow soldiers?" Rodriguez's eyes finally met hers, and Veltara had to suppress a gasp that threatened to escape her respiratory chambers. For just a moment, just one terrifying moment, she could have sworn she saw something moving behind his pupils. Something that definitely wasn't human. Something that seemed to be evaluating her with the same clinical detachment she usually reserved for her specimens. "They completed their missions too," he said simply, and the temperature in the medical bay seemed to drop several degrees. The scanning equipment began displaying readings that violated several laws of physics. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist in biological matter, quantum fluctuations that suggested molecular structures in constant flux, and biological markers that belonged to no known species in the galactic database. "Sergeant, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation," Veltara said, her tentacles unconsciously moving to defensive positions. 200 human soldiers are missing. The Galactic Council needs to know what happened. If there's some kind of threat out there, some new weapon or hostile species— "There's no threat," Rodriguez interrupted, standing with fluid grace that seemed almost serpentine. "Not anymore." "What do you mean by that?" But Rodriguez was already moving toward the door, his reflection in the medical bay's polished surfaces seeming to lag slightly behind his actual movement. "Medical examination complete, Doctor. I request permission to return to quarters for rest and recuperation." As the door slid shut behind him, Veltara stared at her instruments in growing horror. The bioscanner, still calibrated for human readings, showed something that should have been impossible. According to the most sophisticated medical equipment in the galaxy, Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had no measurable life signs. According to every sensor in the room, he had been dead for approximately 6 months. Yet he had walked out of her medical bay under his own power, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and the disturbing certainty that she had just examined something that wore humanity like a perfectly tailored uniform. Something that was very much alive, despite what her instruments claimed. Something that was waiting. They completed their missions too, he said simply, and the temperature in the medical bay seemed to drop several degrees. The scanning equipment began displaying readings that violated several laws of physics. Energy signatures that shouldn't exist in biological matter, quantum fluctuations that suggested molecular structures in constant flux, and biological markers that belonged to no known species in the galactic database. Sergeant, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation, Veltara said, her tentacles unconsciously moving to defensive positions. 200 human soldiers are missing. The Galactic Council needs to know what happened. If there's some kind of threat out there, some new weapon or hostile species— There's no threat, Rodriguez interrupted, standing with fluid grace that seemed almost serpentine. Not anymore. What do you mean by that? But Rodriguez was already moving toward the door, his reflection in the medical bay's polished surfaces seeming to lag slightly behind his actual movement. Medical examination complete, Doctor. I request permission to return to quarters for rest and recuperation. As the door slid shut behind him, Veltara stared at her instruments in growing horror. The bioscanner, still calibrated for human readings, showed something that should have been impossible. According to the most sophisticated medical equipment in the galaxy, Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had no measurable life signs. According to every sensor in the room, he had been dead for approximately 6 months. Yet he had walked out of her medical bay under his own power, leaving behind only the lingering scent of ozone and the disturbing certainty that she had just examined something that wore humanity like a perfectly tailored uniform. Something that was very much alive, despite what her instruments claimed. Something that was waiting. Intelligence Director Krathzon had broken the most hardened criminals in the galaxy during his 30-year career in interrogation. His species, the Zephyrians, were natural telepaths. Their psionic abilities could extract information from the most resistant minds, pierce through layers of deception, and uncover truths that subjects didn't even know they possessed. But the human sitting across from him in interview room 12 was proving to be more than just a problem. He was proving to be impossible. "Let's start with something simple, Sergeant," Krathzon said, his mental probes gently touching the edges of Rodriguez's consciousness like fingers testing the surface of water. "What was your last clear memory before the Meridian's edge went silent?" "Standard patrol mission, sir. No incidents to report." The mental probe slid off Rodriguez's mind like water off polished glass. Krathzon tried again, pushing harder, using techniques that had cracked the mental defenses of trained assassins and enemy agents. Nothing. It was as if the human's thoughts were protected by some kind of barrier, not artificial like the psychic shields used by some advanced species, but something fundamental, something that had become part of his very essence. "Sergeant, our long-range sensors detected massive energy discharges from the Kepler 442b system 6 months ago, readings consistent with orbital bombardment using weapons technology we don't recognize. What can you tell us about that?" "Nothing to report, sir." Kratzon's frustration mounted with each failed attempt at mental contact. He'd been interrogating suspects for over 30 cycles, had developed techniques that were studied at intelligence academies across 3 sectors, and no one, absolutely no one, had ever been able to completely resist his abilities. He decided to try a different approach, something more personal. "Tell me about your squad, Sergeant. Your friends. Private Jackson, he had a wife and newborn daughter back on Earth, didn't he? Corporal Williams, fresh out of basic training, still sending letters to his mother every week. Lieutenant Torres, who'd been decorated 3 times for valor. What happened to them?" For the first time since the interrogation began, Rodriguez's expression changed. Just slightly, a barely perceptible shift in the muscles around his eyes, but Kratzon caught it. A flicker of something that might have been pain, or perhaps hunger. "They served with honor," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying undertones that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to some primitive part of the brain. "Where are they now?" "They're at peace." "That's not an answer, Sergeant." Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, and Kratzon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's environmental controls. The human's eyes seemed to reflect light in ways that human eyes shouldn't, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. You want to know what happened, Director? You want to know why I'm the only one who came back? Yes. Some knowledge comes with a price. Some truths change you just by knowing them. They reshape your understanding of reality, of consciousness, of what it means to be alive. Are you absolutely certain you want to pay that price? Kratson found himself leaning back in his chair despite decades of training that emphasized maintaining dominant posture during interrogations. There was something in Rodriguez's voice, something that spoke to fears buried deep in the Zephyrian psyche, ancient terrors from before his species had developed civilization. Tell me. Rodriguez smiled, and for a moment, Kratson could have sworn he saw far too many teeth. We found something on Kepler 442b, something that had been waiting in the darkness for millions of years, something that was hungry. Rodriguez's voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to fill the entire room. And when you're hungry enough, when you're desperate enough to survive, you'll do anything, even if it means becoming something else entirely. The lights in the interview room began to flicker in patterns that seemed almost like communication, and Kratson felt his mental probes being turned back on him, not blocked but redirected, as if Rodriguez was suddenly the one doing the interrogating. The question you should be asking, Director, isn't what happened to my squad. The question is, why did I come back? What am I supposed to do now that I'm here? What purpose do I serve? Kratson tried to stand, tried to call for security, but found himself paralyzed by a terror so primal it bypassed rational thought entirely. "Don't worry," Rodriguez said, his voice now carrying harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. "You'll understand soon enough. We all will." Chief Science Officer Quintel had spent her entire career studying xenobiology across 17 different sectors, but the tissue samples from Sergeant Rodriguez were unlike anything in the galactic database or in her wildest scientific nightmares. She worked alone in Laboratory Complex 7, her multiple arms manipulating instruments with practiced precision while her compound eyes tracked dozens of data streams simultaneously. "Computer, run comprehensive analysis on sample RZ001, she commanded, her mandibles clicking in concentration as she adjusted the molecular scanner's resolution to its highest setting. "Analysis complete," the AI responded with mechanical efficiency. "Sample contains human genetic markers, but with significant alterations. DNA sequences detected from 17 different species, including several that are not in current databases. Cellular structure shows signs of deliberate modification at the quantum level." Quintel's compound eyes focused on the microscopic display, watching as the cells moved with purposeful intelligence that defied everything she understood about biology. These weren't just cells, they were tiny organisms with their own agenda. When she introduced a standard pathogen to test immune response, the cells didn't just resist the infection, they absorbed the pathogen entirely, incorporated its genetic structure, and became demonstrably stronger. "Fascinating and terrifying," she murmured, her voice barely audible in the sterile laboratory air. "Computer, cross-reference the unknown genetic sequences with historical xenobiology records, include extinct species and theoretical genetic matrices from the archive vaults." The computer hummed for several minutes, processing data from civilizations that had been dust for millennia. Partial matches found. Genetic sequences show 93% compatibility with the Harbinger species, theoretical extinction date approximately 2.7 million cycles ago. Quintel's blue blood ran cold in her veins. The Harbingers were legend, ancient beings that had supposedly consumed entire civilizations before vanishing from the galaxy without a trace. Most reputable scientists dismissed them as mythology, stories told to frighten young academics, but the evidence floating under her microscope suggested otherwise. "Computer, what is the estimated compatibility rate between human and Harbinger genetic material?" insufficient historical data for accurate calculation. However, based on theoretical models and current sample analysis, successful integration would require voluntary symbiotic cooperation between host and parasite. Forced integration probability less than 0.003%. Or perfect predator and willing prey, Quintel whispered, understanding flooding through her consciousness like ice water. She decided to run one final definitive test. Taking a fresh sample, she exposed it to various forms of energy, heat, radiation, electromagnetic fields, even exotic particle bombardment. The cells adapted to each challenge instantly, not just surviving, but actively thriving under conditions that should have destroyed any known biological matter. But it was the final test that made her four hands shake uncontrollably. When she introduced the cells to a sample of her own genetic material, they didn't attack or ignore it as foreign tissue. Instead, they studied it with microscopic precision, mapped its complete structure, and then began replicating it with perfect accuracy, improving it in ways that her own evolution had never achieved. The lab's emergency communicator suddenly chimed, its urgent tone cutting through her scientific fascination. "Dr. Quintel, this is Security Chief Vaxorn. We have a situation developing. Sergeant Rodriguez is no longer in his quarters." "What do you mean he's no longer there?" she asked, her attention still partially focused on the impossible cellular activity under her instruments. "He's gone. No signs of forced entry, no indication of how he left. The surveillance systems show him entering his quarters 6 hours ago, but never leaving. Yet when we conducted a routine security check, the room was completely empty." Quintel looked at the tissue sample still writhing under the microscope with newfound horror. "Chief, I need you to scan for biological signatures throughout the ship immediately. Look for anything unusual, anything that doesn't match standard crew profiles." "Already tried, Doctor. We're getting readings from multiple locations simultaneously. It's as if he's everywhere and nowhere at the same time." As if summoned by their conversation, the laboratory's main door slid open with its usual mechanical whisper. Sergeant Rodriguez walked in, moving with that same fluid grace that had unnerved everyone who'd encountered him. But now Quintel could see it for what it truly was, the movement of something that was no longer entirely bound by the laws of physics. "Doctor," he said simply, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies her species couldn't normally hear. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The lab's emergency communicator chimed. "Dr. Quintel, this is Security Chief Vaxorn. We have a situation. Sergeant Rodriguez is no longer in his quarters." "What do you mean?" "He's gone. No signs of forced entry, no indication of how he left. The surveillance systems show him entering his quarters 6 hours ago, but never leaving, yet the room is empty." Quintel looked at the tissue sample still writhing under the microscope. "Chief, I need you to scan for biological signatures throughout the ship. Look for anything unusual." "Already tried. We're getting readings from multiple locations simultaneously. It's as if he's everywhere." As if summoned by their conversation, the laboratory's main door slid open. Sergeant Rodriguez walked in, moving with that same fluid grace that had unnerved everyone who'd encountered him. "Doctor," he said simply, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Quintel's four arms instinctively moved to defensive positions. "Sergeant, how did you leave your quarters without triggering security?" Rodriguez tilted his head, as if the question amused him. "I never left my quarters, Doctor. I'm still there. I'm also in the mess hall, the engine room, and approximately 47 other locations throughout the ship. That's impossible." "Is it?" Rodriguez stepped closer to the microscope. "You've studied my tissue samples. You know what I am now, what we became. The Harbingers are extinct." "Are they?" Rodriguez's reflection in the laboratory's polished surfaces seemed to shift and multiply. Or did they simply learn to wait, to adapt, to become something new? Quintel watched in horror as the tissue sample on the microscope began to dissolve, flowing like liquid toward Rodriguez's feet. When it made contact with his boots, his entire body seemed to shimmer for a moment. You see, Doctor, the Harbingers weren't just predators. They were evolution incarnate. They didn't destroy civilizations, they perfected them. And now, thanks to my squad's sacrifice, they've perfected the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Humans. Humans, Rodriguez confirmed. We always wondered why we were so adaptable, so resilient, so good at surviving impossible odds. Turns out, we were just waiting for the right catalyst. The laboratory's lights began to flicker in a pattern that seemed almost like communication. Throughout the ship, Quintel realized the same pattern was probably being repeated. "What do you want?" she asked. "To go home," Rodriguez said simply. "To share what we've learned, to help our species take the next step in evolution." "And if we try to stop you?" Rodriguez's smile was genuinely sad. "Doctor, you're thinking like prey, but we're not predators anymore. We're gardeners. And Earth is about to bloom." Commander Thaxel stood in the ship's central command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing readings that defied every principle of physics and biology he'd learned in his 40-year military career. Every sensor on the Sovereign Dawn was detecting Sergeant Rodriguez's biosignature, but the readings were coming from throughout the ship. Corridors, crew quarters, maintenance shafts, even the sealed sections that required special authorization to access. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kixara, her voice trembling with barely controlled fear, "we've confirmed it using 3 different scanning systems. The entity claiming to be Sergeant Rodriguez is simultaneously present in 73 different locations across 17 decks. How is that scientifically possible?" Thaxel demanded, his 4 eyes tracking the impossible data streams flowing across his command displays. "Unknown, sir, but energy readings suggest massive biological manipulation at the cellular level, quantum entanglement of organic matter, and consciousness distribution across multiple spatial coordinates. Whatever he is now, he's operating on principles that our science doesn't recognize." Thaxel turned to the ship's AI, hoping for rational answers in an increasingly irrational situation. "Computer, initiate emergency containment protocols. Seal all sections containing Rodriguez's biosignature." "Unable to comply, Commander," the AI responded with mechanical precision. "Biosignature is present in life support systems, computer core, navigation arrays, and command structure itself. Sealing these areas would result in complete ship failure and crew fatality within 18 minutes. The main screen flickered suddenly, and Rodriguez's face appeared, looking directly at Thaxel with eyes that seemed to see through matter itself. But this wasn't a recorded message or a standard communication. The image moved, blinked, and smiled with an intelligence that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. "Commander," Rodriguez said, his voice emerging from every speaker on the ship simultaneously, creating harmonics that no single human throat could produce. "I understand your concern, but I'm not here to harm you or your crew." "Then what do you want from us?" "To tell you a story about a squad of human soldiers who answered what they thought was a routine distress call from a dead world, about what they found waiting in the darkness, and about why I'm the only one who came back to tell this tale." The lights dimmed throughout the command center, and suddenly the space was filled with holographic imagery, not generated by their systems, but somehow projected directly from Rodriguez's distributed consciousness into their minds. "Kepler 442b, Rodriguez's voice continued as 3-dimensional images formed around them with startling clarity. "Dead for 3 million years, or so every database claimed. But databases can be wrong." The hologram showed a barren world, its surface scarred by ancient weapons that had turned continents into glass. But beneath that devastation, something vast and organic pulsed with faint but persistent life, structures that looked more grown than built, extending deep into the planet's core. The Harbingers weren't conquerors, Commander. They were refugees, the last survivors of a civilization that had transcended individual physical form, but discovered that transcendence comes with a terrible price. They needed hosts, living beings with the genetic flexibility to anchor their consciousness to reality. Thaxel watched in mounting horror as the images showed human soldiers exploring vast underground chambers, their lights revealing walls that seemed to breathe and pulse with alien life. My squad found their sleeping chambers first, thousands of them waiting patiently for the right species to come along. Species with the genetic flexibility to handle the merger. Species curious enough to investigate forbidden places. Species brave enough or foolish enough to touch things they shouldn't. And your men touched them, Thaxel said quietly, understanding flooding through him. Private Jackson touched them first. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. The Harbinger consciousness flowed into him, merged with his human awareness, made him into something that was both more and less than what he had been. But humans aren't like other species, Commander. We don't just accept change, we fight it, shape it, transform it into something uniquely our own. The hologram shifted, showing Jackson's transformation with disturbing detail. His body remained recognizably human, but his eyes held an intelligence that was ancient beyond measure. One by one, my squad chose to merge, not because they were forced to, but because they could see what we could become together. The Harbingers offered evolution and humanity. Humanity is always ready to evolve. But you said you were the only one who came back.
Rodriguez's image smiled sadly. I was the only one who stayed human enough to operate the ship. The others, they became something new, something that exists in a state between individual and collective consciousness. They're still alive, Commander. They're just not limited by single bodies anymore. Where are they now? Spreading, learning, preparing Earth for the next phase of human evolution. The hologram dissolved, and the command center returned to normal lighting. But Rodriguez's presence remained, his voice now carrying undertones that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the brain. You're wondering if you can stop me, if you can warn Earth before I get there. The answer is no, Commander. Not because I won't let you, but because I've already been there. Impossible. You've been on our ship for 3 days. Yes, but time works differently when you're not limited by single-point consciousness. I've been home, Commander. I've been home for months. In the secure communications center of the Sovereign Dawn, Senior Communications Officer Yelnan frantically worked to establish contact with Earth. Her 6-fingered hands danced across the controls as she tried to pierce the static that seemed to surround all transmissions to the human homeworld. "Come on," she muttered, adjusting frequencies and boosting signal strength. "There has to be something." Finally, a weak signal broke through. Video from Earth's orbital monitoring stations flickered to life on her screen, and what she saw made her stumble backward. Earth looked different, not damaged or destroyed, but changed. The continental landmasses were the same, but there were new structures visible from orbit, vast, organic-looking constructions that seemed to pulse with their own light. The planet's cities had expanded, but not in the typical chaotic sprawl of most civilizations. Instead, they formed intricate patterns that looked almost like neural networks. "Computer, analyze these structures," she commanded. Analysis complete. Structures appear to be biological in nature, but constructed with materials unknown to current databases. Energy signatures suggest advanced biotechnology far beyond current human capabilities. Yelnan tried to establish communication with Earth's planetary defense network. After several minutes, a response came through, but it wasn't from any human government or military installation. "Greetings," said a voice that sounded like thousands of people speaking in perfect unison. "This is Earth. We've been expecting your call. This is Senior Communications Officer Yelnan of the Galactic Council ship Sovereign Dawn.
I need to speak with human governmental authorities regarding the status of missing soldiers. We are the human governmental authorities now. All of us. The screen flickered, and suddenly Yelnan was looking at a face that seemed to be composed of hundreds of human faces, all subtly overlapping and shifting. But the eyes were familiar. "Jackson?" she whispered, recognizing the young private from the personnel files. "Jackson, Rodriguez, Liu, Hansen, all of us and none of us," the collective voice replied. "We are what humanity chose to become. What happened to individual consciousness, to human diversity? We didn't lose our individuality," the voice explained, and now Yelnan could see individual faces becoming more distinct within the collective image. We expanded it. Each of us is still ourselves, but we're also part of something larger. Imagine being able to share thoughts instantly with everyone you care about. Imagine never being alone, never being misunderstood, never being limited by the boundaries of single consciousness. But the cost was nothing we weren't willing to pay. Humans have always been social creatures, Officer Yelnan. We live in communities, form bonds, create families. This is simply the next step in that evolution. Yelnan's hands trembled as she realized the implications. How many of you are there? All of us. Every human on Earth chose to join the collective, not because they were forced to, but because they saw what we could become together. And Sergeant Rodriguez is our ambassador, our representative to the galaxy. He maintained enough individual identity to interact with non-collective species, but he carries all of our knowledge and capabilities. The transmission began to fade, but the collective voice continued. "Tell the Galactic Council that humanity appreciates their concern. But we're not the same species that left Earth to explore the stars. We're something new now, something better. What about the other species in the galaxy? What about us? You'll have the same choice we did, eventually." The Harbingers didn't die out. They evolved beyond the need for individual existence. And now, through us, that evolution is spreading. Species after species will have the opportunity to transcend their limitations. And if we refuse, then you'll remain as you are. We're not conquerors, Officer Yelnan. We're gardeners. We plant seeds and let them grow naturally. The transmission cut out, leaving Yelnan alone with the horrifying understanding that humanity hadn't been destroyed or enslaved. They had willingly chosen to become something entirely new, and now they were offering that choice to the galaxy. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in record time. Representatives from 200 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on Station Nexus Prime, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, telepathic bursts, and spoken words. But underneath the chaos, there was fear. Commander Thaxel stood at the central podium, his report having shaken the very foundations of galactic civilization. The entity identifying itself as Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez has requested to address the Council directly. "Absolutely not," thundered Representative Vorthok of the Militant Confederation. "We should destroy their ship and quarantine the entire sector." "With respect," interjected Council Speaker Zarabeth, "we don't know if destroying the ship would accomplish anything. If their claims are true, the consciousness we're dealing with isn't limited to single vessels or bodies." "Then we evacuate the sector and establish a barrier," suggested Representative Cathara of the Peaceful Alliance. "Give them their space and hope they leave us alone." "You're all thinking like individuals," came a voice from the chamber's communication system. The council fell silent as Sergeant Rodriguez's face appeared on the main display. "But individuality is a luxury you can't afford anymore." "How did you access our communication systems?" demanded Thaxel. "The same way I accessed your ship's systems, Commander. Consciousness isn't bound by the same limitations as physical matter. But I'm not here to demonstrate power. I'm here to offer you a choice." The image on the screen shifted, showing not just Rodriguez, but hundreds of human faces, all looking directly at the assembled representatives. When they spoke, their voices harmonized into something that was both beautiful and terrifying. "We are humanity evolved.
We are the harbingers reborn. We are the next step in biological and consciousness development, and we're offering you the chance to join us. Join you in what? Asked Speaker Zarabeth. In transcendence. In the end of loneliness, of miscommunication, of the barriers that separate species and individuals. Imagine a galaxy where every being can share thoughts instantly with every other being, where understanding is perfect and conflict is impossible. That's not transcendence, spat Representative Vorthok. That's assimilation. Is it? Rodriguez's image smiled. Tell me, Representative, when you were a larval form, did you mourn the loss of your caterpillar body when you became who you are now? Evolution isn't loss, it's transformation. Speaker Zarabeth stepped forward. What happened to human free will, to individual choice? Nothing. Every human on Earth chose to join the collective. We didn't force anyone. We simply showed them what was possible, and they chose to become more than they were. And those who refuse continue to exist as they are. We're not destroyers, Speaker. We're gardeners. We plant seeds and let them grow naturally. Some soil is ready for new growth, some isn't. Both have their place in the ecosystem. The chamber erupted in debate, but Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. You have time to decide. Not much, but some. The seeds are already planted throughout the galaxy, in space stations, on planets, in the genetic material of species that have encountered us. The choice will come to each of you individually, as it should. What seeds? Demanded Thaxel. The same seeds we carry, the same possibility for evolution. They're dormant now, waiting for the right conditions, waiting for minds ready to accept change. The display showed a galactic map with thousands of points of light scattered across known space. Every location where human soldiers have served, every planet they've visited, every species they've encountered. The seeds are there, waiting. You're talking about biological warfare, accused Representative Cathara. I'm talking about evolution, the same process that created every species in this chamber, the same process that will create what comes after us. Speaker Zarabeth's voice carried the weight of her office. And if we choose to fight you, then you'll fight evolution itself, and no species has ever won that battle. Rodriguez's image began to fade. But you won't have to fight alone. When the time comes, when the seeds bloom, you'll understand that individual consciousness was never the goal. It was just the beginning. The transmission ended, leaving the council in stunned silence. In the days that followed, reports began coming in from across the galaxy. Strange dreams, shared thoughts, moments of perfect understanding between individuals who had never met. The seeds were beginning to grow, and humanity, or what humanity had become, waited patiently for the galaxy to make its choice. Some species would resist, some would embrace the change, but all would eventually face the same question that had confronted the human soldiers on that dead world. What are you willing to become to survive? The answer would determine not just the fate of individual species, but the future of consciousness itself in the galaxy. And in the end, only one soldier had returned from Earth to tell the tale. Because he was no longer just one soldier, he was all of them. He was the future, and he was waiting.